Hello and welcome to Victor George Leather Goods YouTube. My name is George. Today I'm going to show you step-by-step process for building this beautiful Australian hobble belt, otherwise known as a stockman's belt or a cowboy belt. I'm going to show you every phase of this build, from pattern making, an abridged version this time, and everything that you need to do to build this yourself. So I'm also going to include my unique approach at how I attach the knife sheath, which a knife on the belt is historically accurate. And I'm going to show you absolutely everything from the construction to the completion. So if you're a cowboy, a rancher, or a Western fan and want to wear a unique piece of Western history, then this build is for you. It's also a piece of tack. It's actually a hobble belt used in the livestock industry. So stick around, let's do this. All right, a material list for this Australian hobble belt is 66 inches of firm 8-ounce veg tan leather, 1.5 inches wide, a 1.5 inch center bar buckle, 2 O-rings, the inside diameter 2 inches. You'll also need some 4 5-ounce leather for your knife sheath attachment and for the lining of the belt. Let's talk pattern dimensions for this hobble belt real quick. Piece number 1 is the buckle end to the ring end. Overall length is 10 3/4 inches. From turn back to turn back is 4 inches. From the slot center turn back to the end is 3 1/4 inches, clipped corners, and from this turn back, the ring turn back to the end is 3 3/8 inches. Now I'm going to show you here in a moment how I draw these shallow V turnbacks, so hang tight. All right, piece number 2 is the next piece where the knife sheath is mounted. And this overall is 9 1/8 inches. From turn back to turn back is 4 7/8 inches and 2 1/8 inches to each end from the turn back. Piece 2 also requires a filler piece of the same white leather, 3 7/8 inches. And the belt is 42 inches overall. My turn back to the end is 3 inches. The first hole in a series of 12 is 4 inches from the tip. All right, now let me just show you how I draw those shallow V's. Nothing here is high-tech at Victor George. This is all drawn by pen. But anyway, this would be piece number 2. So the first thing that you do is you establish your turn back locations by drawing a vertical line on the 1.5 inch belt pattern. That establishes your turn back. And then to get these shallow V cuts is nothing more than this. So I take my ruler, and at that turn back, it's 1 inch. 1 inch from the turn back on each end. So you draw a little tick there, and then you go in 1/4 of an inch. Draw a little tick mark there. And then it's nothing more than connecting the dots. And that's how you draw the tapered V or the shallow V turn back. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. All right, let's get this build started with the first piece, the buckle and ring piece. And I am assuming that you have some basic leathercraft skills, so I'm going to highlight these fairly quickly. So take your pattern piece and cut to leather. And once you cut it to leather, you need to dress it up a little bit. And by that I mean take your edger and edge all sides of this strap piece. Establish your slot punch. Now this slot punch is for thick-tongued buckles and just not in production anymore. So once you've cut everything out, and then I take my wing dividers and I establish a decorative border only and I run it all around there. And then I take this $6 plastic bone folder, and then I just run it in the groove of the lines established by the wing dividers. That deepens it. I demonstrate this a little bit more during the belt stage. So once you get that, you take a little bit of water, and you just lightly coat the edge, and then use the Dremel with the felt wheel burnisher that I showed you in one of my tips videos, and then just go all the way around and burnish your edges. Of course, if you want to dye your belt, this would be a good time to dye it and get it ready for the next operation. Okay, so what we do now is this is ever so lightly damp. It's not even cased, it's just one spritz of water. But you take your buckle and you place it in there, and if you'll notice, that buckle fills, that leather fills that complete buckle, and that's what you want. You don't want any slop or play in that buckle. Go ahead and thread your buckle through. And also, I just noticed here, you can take your name stamp and stamp it there. The reason I have a little patch there is because I stamped my maker's mark upside down. So instead of cutting a whole new piece, I just cut a little patch there, and no one's the wiser except all of us. All right, so you put your buckle in, and you lay your turn back down with the clip corners. Then you take your ring, place it into this turn back, and now I will skive about a ½ an inch, skive to feather, and then all of these pieces are tri-folded like this. That gives it the strength. And then you can sew that all together, and that is your first piece. All right, let's talk about the second piece now in between the two O-rings that house the sheath that we're going to make in a few clips later. Anyway, once you have this piece cut, edged, burnished, all your decorative trim lines, I didn't do that for the sake of repetition, but you do that on your own. Then you take this piece and you run your stainless steel post through that, it's 5/16 post, and then you take your filler piece and you put that in there as well. Now you're going to attach this to both rings, the buckle end and this belt end, but the belt hasn't been attached yet, of course. So now what we're going to do is we're going to fold these tabs down, and we want all these corners to meet up, which means that you might have to do a little bit of trim work. You may have to take a 1/16 of an inch off of each edge here too. There is a little bit of fine fitting involved. So the point that we're trying to get now is the 3-ply with about an inch in between the two ends of the turnbacks. That's where the stud is going to be positioned. So once everything is where you like it, then of course you're going to take your back piece here, your filler, you're going to glue that down, and then you're going to place your tabs over and you're going to glue them into position too. Once they're all glued in there, then go ahead and sew like I did here all the way across the strap. And then that piece will be complete. So now we're on to the belt itself. So of course we're going to take the main belt piece, and then we're going to line it with 4 or 5 ounce veg tent as well. And you know, obviously the gluing steps and the trimming of the lining and the sewing and all that stuff. So I've put a couple of videos together following this section on how I do that, and let's get to it. Okay, when you're gluing the belt to the liner, I like to take a piece of lumber and elevate the main part of the belt. The lining, it's not a problem. Usually we'll glue outside the edge, but on the belt itself, so what I do is I elevate the belt off of the surface, and then I bring the edge over this piece of wood, and then it's just a matter of going from the center out, and of course on the opposite end you do the same thing. Okay, you don't want a lot of gloopy glue. You want it sort of brushed in very nicely, and you let it tack up. Press them together carefully, and then I'll usually take a second piece of wood like that, put some weights on there, and let it compress and cure for a little bit before I sew it. Here's a little tip. So gluing belts sometimes together is a little bit challenging because, of course, it has a tendency to stick sometimes where you don't want it. So I just use parchment paper on the areas I don't want. I can lay the belt on there, and then I can maneuver it to get a perfect press. And as I get up the belt a little bit, I can just remove these sheets. I think you get the idea. And then that way you won't have any premature stick. While I was sewing the belt for this video, my big head was in the way and nothing was captured. So I at least wanted to answer a couple of questions I've gotten before. What is the best sewing machine to get for a new leather shop that wants to invest in a sewing machine? Mine and many other opinions are the Cobra Class 26 by the Leather Machine Company. I went many years before I got one, and I only use it for belts and straps and dog collars and various items like that. I'm a big hand stitcher. But anyway, this machine is wonderful. I got the gray one many years ago. They're now brown and updated with a larger bobbin. So I suggest that you get the brown one with the larger bobbin. But anyway, it's a wonderful stitching machine for a first machine in a leather shop. Let me put a few stitches in here to show you, and then we'll move on. It walks real slow, and you can crank it up a little bit. It does come with a roller foot, but I do it by eye. Anyway, that's it. It's a great machine. Does a great top and a bottom stitch, and there you go. You know, one never realizes how many steps there are involved in just doing a simple belt, but it's pretty amazing. Now that I'm documenting this, so to speak, just realized that. So anyway, what I do is I take two pieces of lumber, 39 inches by 2.5 by 3/4. I take a yardstick and I just nail it lightly in there. That way I can take them out and adjust them for various thickness of straps. I take my belt strap and I set it in there like that, just to make sure that I have a full 1/4 inch or more above that. And then I take a top piece of wood, or like that, and then you have a gap in there. You can put this in your bench vise or your drill press vise like I do here. And you place your belt in there like that, and then you can do your sanding operations, your burnishing operations, and then our next step will be to edge and finalize the front face of this. So anyway, a handy little tool to have in your shop when you're doing belts. There you go. Okay, now I'm going to show you a very simple, requiring basic tools way to dress up your edge on your belts or knife sheaths or holsters or anything else when they're just relatively plain. So I take my wing dividers first, and then I just go in between the stitch line and the outside edge, and I work myself a little groove. I do 2 or 3 passes just to get a little bit of depth there. Now I have sanded with 1000 grit the very sharp points off of that to give me that nice smooth line. And then once I do that, I either take my cheap $6 boner creaser made out of plastic, and or my $20 Craft Tool Pro creaser, and all I do is basically hold it like a pencil, and I go in that line that I just wing divided, and the line itself gives you a nice little guide. So just keep it up 90 degrees, follow that around to the tip, and then you can do a couple passes. Then I take my wing dividers again and I go equal distance. And I do the same thing, couple of passes, give myself a groove to follow, and I better do it the way I always do, and just take this. Of course, follow it around. Nice way to dress up your edges. Okay, once you take the belt from the rack, the burnishing rack that I showed you, I like to finish it off with a wax impregnated denim rag. And this thing is just loaded with years of wax usage. And then you just hold it over the edge of your bench, and then you run it across the entire belt, both sides, like this off of the edge. That really burnishes the top edge here and just makes a real nice finished belt. All right, now we have finished the belt. This is the mock-up, of course, and it's completely sewn, edged. The belt is absolutely complete. And now to place it on to the final assembly. This is the correct orientation for the belt. The flat part of the stud is up. Now you take your belt piece, you attach it through the loop. This would be grain side up. Now you would match the corners, stitch it, and rivet it however you care to. And that is the completed belt. So the only thing we have left to do now is to make this style of sheath. You can make however you like, but this is the style I use for this particular build. And we're going to show you how to make this in the next few clips. And then we'll get ready to oil everything and seal it. And we'll be done. Thank you. All right, let's discuss the making of a molded pouch sheath for the hobble belt. So mine is an integral winged pouch sheath, and I'm going to show you here the guidelines or the basics for making this happen. So the first thing that you need to do is take a piece of firm temper 4 or 5 ounce leather, cut yourself a square about the size of the sheath. Now I use these plastic sheets that come from craft stores. Why measure when you can immediately get the size that you need? Okay, so once you get your piece, what I do is I will burnish and scribe my little decorative groove in there. And then I have a mold here that was made for me by a woodworker. And so the first thing that you should do, I try to do this upside down, is you set this on the end. And then while I'm going to turn it sideways. And then while you're holding the face down, just start molding with your hands. Just get a little bit of the shape going here. Press it in on the side. And there's a lot of little handwork involved in this. And just start forming it around that end piece. Now, this is a homemade tool from many years back. It's a water faucet handle mounted into a wooden handle, and this will help with some of the molding process. So now it takes a little bit of time. Leather, when it's been cased like this, is very, very malleable, and we don't need much of a stitch line around there, and this takes a little bit of time. So instead of me sitting here and doing this for 20 minutes, I'm going to show you here how this press works. So it works like an old hamburger press, if anybody's familiar with that. So once you get generally the shape down, then you take this end here, and the insides have been smoothed and rounded, and you press it, hold the end down, and then press it on. Once you get it pressed on, I have these 1960 clamps here, which I love. A little pressure on there. And then just let that sit. And then we'll come back when that's dry. Let's see what our press made. So it's dried overnight, and we've got a nice deep mold for the knife that we're gonna make. Okay, so once we get to that, you'll notice a little deformity at the tip. I will trim that with my homemade knife. You can even see it was held together with copper rivets. But anyway, you can just trim that true. Obviously, we'll have to re-dye that edge. But anyway, then I just take a little bit of a spray bottle and I moisten it ever so slightly so that I can get a little bit of a mark on there. So I take my wing dividers, and from the edge of the mold is a very distinct line. I'll go a full 1/4 inch around. I am going to trim it later, but right along that edge, I'll establish my area around that. And all these little wrinkles that you get from these tail ends will disappear during the next few steps. Okay, so once I have my perimeter established, now I'm going to do is I'm going to take my stitch line very close to this inside piece, and the rest of this will probably be trimmed away. I'll go 1/8 of an inch. And that'll be my stitch line. And the moisture in the leather helps. And all these little irregular lines here, you can always clean up with your stitch marker. Okay, then I'm just gonna take my stitch marker. I'm gonna follow this around. I'm gonna clean up this edge here and then trim the excess, and then I'll be back with that. I changed my stitch line pattern a little bit. I brought it a little closer to the mold line, about 1/16 of an inch. I like it a little bit tighter, and then move my outside perimeter as well. So I marked my stitching holes with a 4mm pricking iron, and now it's just a matter of trimming off the excess. So this is a new blade in this utility knife, but I always strop it even as a brand new blade. Okay, now when you get to the corners, you could either follow it around, or you can just do little straight cuts like this. Just follow the edge. And then once you get this all cut off, you can take your salon board and just clean up the edge a little bit. And it's just like woodwork or metalwork or anything else. You know, that sort of helps true everything up. So anyway, what I'm going to do now off camera is I'm going to finish cutting this. I'm going to go ahead and just edge the top line only. The back side is going to be glued to a back piece, so only edge the top piece. And we'll show you that step here in just a moment. I finished edging the pouch itself, of course sanded it, edged it, just the top part, and threw some dye and did a little burnish work. Now I placed it onto a piece of the same weight, 4 5-ounce veg tan, and it's on the grain side. So this is the grain side is up. And to mark the pouch, I use a couple of tacks because you want this pouch the original size of the mold that you want. You have to push it in and try to hold it while you're drawing your lines. So that'll help you there. So now I did that. Now I want to establish the for the wings. on the second piece of this hobble belt. So in between these two turnbacks, I'm getting basically an inch. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to slide it up underneath here, and I'm going to find the correct angle. Make sure it's perpendicular as best you can, and then just draw. Let's double check that. Just draw your wing lines. And again, this is on the grain side of your leather. Okay, and once you get that, take your pouch off, and that gives you your back piece for the pouch sheath and the wings. Now on this this piece here, I just rounded the top off, put my maker's mark on there, and you know, it's just one other thing that I like to do. So now off camera, I'm going to glue this all together, and I'm going to stitch it, and I'm going to do my edge work, and then we'll show you how we fit it to that back panel. We've now finished sewing the sheath. We've edged it and sanded all the corners, made it look nice. We've got the wings attached, and of course, you know, you would make this for whatever particular knife that you want to carry. So the way that I do this now is I take the second part of the belt where the knife's going to sit, and I have a pad so that I don't scratch up or mar the face, and I place it so that the mouth is towards the buckle. Center the wings on there. Now these have been moistened a little bit, and I'm going to put this bottom one up, and I'm going to get my mark like I did there. And now I'm going to punch that with a 1/2 inch hole. Okay, so I have my 1/2 inch hole. Then I'm just going to take an end punch and clean that up a little bit. So now, of course, we're going to have to finish all these edges, but we take that and we stretch it over that, and then we push that down over there. Make a mark for our 24 line cap and socket, and we'll set that, and then we'll show you that how it goes together. I'm going to actually trim that tip a little bit so that it's not quite over the edge of the belt, and then we'll be back. As you've seen, there's a lot of dry fitting and a lot of measuring and stretching, and it's all part of the handwork phase of leatherwork. So now we're going to put this on. We've got all the wings, the holes, and the 24 line cap and socket set up. We're going to place it on the front of the belt. We're going to bring up the strap that's going to go over the stud, and then just put our snap in, and there is the finished sheath. The important part is that it's removable, and that shouldn't be too much wider than the belt itself. And that's it. It's really amazing how many little details there are on fabricating of leatherwork. It's probably why it's so expensive. So anyway, there you go. Here we are at the end. We have completed this beautiful Australian hobble belt, or a stockman's belt, and it is now ready for its final treatment, and that will be oiling and conditioning with a waterproofing agent. So let's talk about that for just a second here. Once it's all done, I use Be Natural Leather Care. I'm not sponsored, but this saddle oil here has some properties in it that are inhospitable to nature's invasions. Basically, it prevents mice and rat infestation, or chewing on this, I should say. And that's what I apply with a small warming crock pot with an attached brush that I use, not heavily, but just make sure everything's coated and wiped down. Let it sit for 24 hours. And then once you are done with the oiling process, the next day I apply Snow Seal. This is going to be used out in the wild, and if you're sleeping out under the stars, this is what you want to use for this. Speaking of sleeping under the stars, so when you're ready to employ this as a hobble belt from a hip belt, this is how it's done. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the knife, and then we're going to take the now hobble strap, and we're going to take the tail end, we're going to run it through the first ring here. That creates your first hobble. And then you figure eight it back into the next ring up by the buckle, and then you attach it to whatever hole is necessary. And this is what creates the hobble. Okay? This was a fun project. I've made a few of these, but this is the newest version, and I really enjoy this particular style. So, hope you enjoyed it as well. Hope you build one for yourself. Add one of these to your belt line. Let's get this back in popularity, and thanks to the Australians for developing this gorgeous belt. Thank you.